Hi, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. My name is George Ortega. I'm here with Chandler Klebs, and today we're talking about something really, really interesting. Basically, many of our podcasts have to do with explaining why free will is impossible, why we human beings do not have a free will. However, along with that understanding comes the question, well, if our wills are not up to us, if our thoughts, feelings, actions are not up to us, who or what do we ascribe them to? Okay, so Chandler, start us off. How should we theorize? You know, what should we ascribe our thoughts, our intelligence, our actions to?
Well, here's how I would put it. I would say that our intelligence as well as our consciousness is not something that all of a sudden magically appears once you have a fully developed brain and nervous system. Because I don't think it's something that evolved, but rather something that had to always be there. And the reason I say this is because how do you get even the idea of consciousness from living cells if those living cells aren't already conscious? And how do you get any idea of intelligence or know how to be able to respond to your environment unless the cells already know how to respond to that environment? And when you have an injury, your blood cells, the skin cells, it all just heals it up, unless it's too major, and you heal, and you don't have to consciously in your brain start that process. It's already done by your cells, and so I think that life is much more beautiful, mysterious, and amazing than people seem to believe.
All right. I agree with you. I think, there has to be kind of like some kind of fundamental consciousness, intelligence, but let's describe in a bit more detail how we get there, how we get to this conclusion, this understanding. Okay, we start off with the recognition that what we do, what other organisms do, what other animals do, etc., is not freely willed. It's not up to us. And one way we can describe what actually controls our actions and thoughts is mechanistically through this law of cause and effect. That essentially our thoughts, our actions are the direct causal result of, let's say, most generally, the state of the universe at the prior moment, prior to whatever is done, whatever we do. And then the cause of that state of the universe is naturally the previous state, and the cause of that state is the previous state. So essentially, whatever we human beings do, whatever other animals do, can be mechanistically, completely causally explained by the evolving states of the universe that lead up to whatever action or thought it is. Otherwise, I mean, to posit otherwise would be to suggest that our actions and thoughts are taking place outside of the universe, and so that is an impossibility.
Yeah, that sounds absurd to suggest that it happens outside the universe because the universe is everything that exists anyway. So yeah, because if your thoughts and actions did not stem from the prior state of the universe, well, what would they come from?
Exactly. All right, so we have a kind of like a mechanistic explanation, but now let's turn to kind of like the biology, the the more organic explanation. So we um, we have thoughts, and they're basically the result of our brains. So in the sense of our brains, I think what we can do is describe our brains as amazing processors of information. And we can use the analogy of a computer. A computer takes a lot of information, puts it together, and it problem solves, it reaches conclusions based on its programming. And so I think our brain does the same thing, based on our, evolutionary genetics, or on our heredity, our genetic coding. It basically, processes what the senses perceive, what even the cells perceive, and then makes determinations, makes conclusions, makes changes. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds pretty accurate. And everything is so interconnected and everything's so quick the way that our bodies work, that I don't think like, yeah, I don't think of the brain as some kind of a thing that processes information that's somehow separate from the rest of the body, because some people almost make it sound that way. and and I guess what they're doing is they're ignoring that all the sensations, every type of input, every type of consciousness, every feeling, smell, sight, hearing, smell, all of these things are inputs, which is much more complex than what a computer experiences. Because there's keystrokes and there's mouse clicks, mouse movement, events and stuff with a computer. But what biological things experience, the sensory overload, the input coming from so many different ports, you might say, is way more than any computer built by humans could handle.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've got the five senses. We have all these other kinds of, like, the sense of balance. I mean, there's various inputs coming from different organs. And all right, so, like, basically what we're describing though is, like, to put it in the context of free will, our brain, in yeah, as you're explaining, in cooperation with, in conjunction with the other organs of our body, and perhaps other, aspects of reality outside of our body. And, well, no, certainly, like the environment. The environment is certainly an input that's being received by the senses. So, like, basically our brain processes this information and arrives at conclusions. And again, I think, like, one way we could understand this is, like, with computers. You have, like, the hardware engineers and the software engineers that basically, through series of experiments, of just, trial and error, they basically come up with these machines and the software to run the machines that I think we have to, like, essentially define as intelligent behavior, intelligent actions. And again, we use that same description of that kind of behavior to what our brains do. Essentially, our brains are constantly processing information and coming up with intelligent conclusions, intelligent answers to whatever needs to be described. Now, Chandler, so the where we're at is the, like, so, certainly we human beings, just like computers, do things, basically manifest processes that have to be termed intelligent. But the problem is that because we don't have a free will, this intelligence can't be fundamentally ascribed to us. So, given that, how would you define or explain the intelligence that we manifest?
Well, it's interesting because it seems to be a universal intelligence, one that doesn't belong to anybody. It's sort of public domain. It's kind of, yeah, and you have to get back into, well, what is us? Because if we are a collection of cells, it's not like there's one cell or one single gene in a strand of DNA that is us. And so, like, I sort of get how the self is an illusion, And so this is weird. So I think of me as life. I think of you as life, almost like that we're all part of the universe and we're all life. So it's sort of like we are all part of one universal life, one gigantic beehive or something like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, Chandler, because basically last night I was reviewing James Lovelock's theory of Gaia, where he I think proposed this back in the '60s, and at first it was ridiculed, and it basically describes the Earth as a self-regulating organism that the life forms on the in the Earth basically have this kind of like communication with and cooperation with the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the temperature and all these other climactic aspects of our planet. I definitely see how how you're describing this kind of like intelligence as pervading I guess reality outside of ourselves. It does have its empirical validation. But now let's explore. In other words, like in terms of like trying to understand the intelligence that guides our brain, our human brains to then, do what we do. Let's explore this from a more fundamental level. Let's explore this from the evolutionary perspective of of random mutation, of like DNA and how we evolve from one from having certain attributes to others, to to different species.
Yeah, because the kind of randomness that you and I think is absurd is the uncaused randomness, like it just happened for no reason. And some people mean it as in there's no intention, like there's no plan. Um, but I'm not so sure I can go with that randomness either. Like I think that living cells may intentionally try to build organisms that are better adapted to the environment. So I think there might be an intention. There's not too much you can say about intentions, but it does certainly appear that some adaptations, like the Venus flytrap and the moths changing color to adapt to the trees and stuff, might indicate that.
Right. So I mean, because like, let's explore this concept of randomness, because basically, some people would suggest that our human thoughts are somehow free because they're random. And that makes no sense because, like, in the strong sense, random means without order and without cause, that things just happen. And, certainly that wouldn't describe a free will because if things are just happening, quote unquote, randomly, then our wills or we could not be causing these things to happen. But let's explore this concept of randomness in terms of random mutation, in terms of like this evolutionary process. So you're right. If I think we have to reject the notion of randomness as a causality and of randomness without order. So then, like, what we're left with is that evolution is not a and all right, just there's one use of the word random that I think is correct in this, but it's a different use than I think most people apply to it. And basically, I think when Darwin and the developers of evolution used the term random, I think what they meant was that like it was a perceived randomness. In other words, there was an acknowledgement that certain processes were happening in terms of evolution, in terms of DNA replications and random mutations that we human beings simply were not able to be aware of or able to understand its processes. So that I think is the randomness that they refer to. And so let's explore that. So like in other words, like if the if the DNA that I think basically gives instructions to the cells on in terms of how to act is acting according to an ordered process, what else can we say about this DNA?
Well, it has to have some type of intelligence, some type of awareness. It has to have knowledge of how to respond to an environment, I would think.
Exactly, exactly. In other words, why would DNA, why would the genes, the chromosomes within DNA change at all?
Exactly. Because, yeah, it's a good thing you brought that up because unless there was some reason for there being a mutation, well, there wouldn't be a mutation. If there was no cause for the mutation, yeah, then all genes would be exactly the same. There wouldn't even be any kind of change. We would all look the same, and
Exactly. All right, now we generally understand evolution in terms of like thousands or millions of years, that it's a very slow process, but recent scientists have discovered a kind of an evolution that's actually quite fast. It's called microevolution, and the way they describe it is like in a region in England, there are these moths that had white wings. They were basically white moths, and their habitat was these trees with whitish bark, which would allow them to blend in and camouflage themselves so as to escape predators. Now, what happened was in that region in England, because of the Industrial Revolution, a lot of soot and carbon dioxide and pollution was put into the air, and it actually colored the bark on these trees dark. It made the tree bark dark. And so what happened was, and this isn't the same mechanism that a chameleon uses, because a chameleon changes color in a way that's not DNA driven. It's just part of their natural biology. But these moths actually, at the DNA level, um, were able to, within the span of, I think, perhaps years or decades, make a change so that their wings turned dark to match the newly dark bark on the trees that they inhabit. And then what's equally amazing is that then eventually that region in England cleaned its air. It began to kind of like pull the pollution out of the atmosphere, out of the air. And when that happened, the trees began to turn white again. And again, through this DNA process, the moths, the wings of the moths themselves turned from black to white again. Now, this again. These are DNA mutations. They're not like just simply um, characteristics of the organism as with a chameleon.
yeah, yeah. For example, there like humans put on different clothes. We change clothes with warmer or cold weather. We just change the outside. We just change the clothes we wear to adjust to it. But with these organisms, they that live in extremely hot and extremely cold places, they have had to adapt to where without the use of any artificial man-made equipment they are still able to live because internally their DNA has changed. They grow hair, they lose hair, all sorts of stuff like that.
Exactly. So then, all right, with that example, with the example of the moths, with any example that relates to DNA, we have to then posit. I mean, like you were saying before, these changes don't happen for no reason. These changes are responses to environmental challenges, to trying to seek environmental advantages. So then the question, so then the question becomes, so like basically, like we know DNA is made of chromosomes, of genes, chromosomes, and that the chromosomes are made of like four different chemicals that bind to each other in different ways, and that's what forms the different genes. Now we know that, but like I think what we also have to uh, conclude is these DNA, these genes must be communicating with the outside environment in order to be able to understand how to change.
Yeah. It's interesting, and here's a great example, George. I was out at my mom has this friend who has a kind of a farm, and she has some horses, and this lady, I was petting and brushing this horse, and this lady was explaining about their hair, how in the winter they grow this winter coat of fur, but in the summer they shed it. And so there has to be some sort of way of the cells responding, knowing, oh, it's time to start shedding this hair. It's time to start growing this extra coat of hair. Like there, yeah. So there's something here that I think humans have been ignoring, a fundamental part of nature and the nature of living things that for too long they've just been dismissing.
Exactly, because like with evolution, basically, the general understanding or perhaps misunderstanding is that it's a random process. In other words, like it's like just like there's no order in it, and that doesn't make sense because that would be kind of like suggesting that you could like put the materials, let's say, that comprise a building in one geographic area, and then expect them to somehow magically just organize themselves into a structure. And so that it's just an impossibility. So yes, so we then have to like conclude that that at the DNA level, I think at the cellular level, and also at the level of the organs that make up the human body, certainly at the level of the brain, there has to be process. It can't be random mutation. There has to be an ordered, purpose-driven intelligence that's guiding these processes.
Yes, I see what you're saying here because it sort of almost sounds like who was the name of that philosopher that said, was it Leucippus who said nothing happens at random, but everything for a reason and by necessity? Was that guy?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, Lucippus, yep.
yeah, well, you know what? If you've seen the movie Kung Fu Panda, there's Master Shifu, and he's like, "There are no accidents." You know, it sounds almost similar. Like people are making it sound like things are, oh, it's just random, no reason, it's just an accident. And I think that's a false statement. I think that's just a dismissal of something they don't understand, and they're not looking into it further. But I'm more than happy to look into it.
Exactly. And let's take the analogy, for example, of computers again. You have these like hardware engineers and software engineers, basically doing intelligent experimentation. They're trying like certain materials in terms of like to build the memory for computers and to build the certain components for computers. And a lot of what they tried didn't work. They might tried like 1,000 different kinds of materials configured in 1,000 different ways until they come up with the solution, with the answer. And with the software, again, they might try different approaches to various software problems before they come up with the answer. And it's an intelligently driven process. And we can apply this analogy to the DNA. And in terms of like this quote unquote random mutation, basically the DNA is basically somehow being communicated to by the environment, and it's basically trying to figure out how to best address whatever it's being called upon to address, whether it's like the need for more food, a more hospitable climate, whatever it is that the environment challenge might be. But again, I think we have to acknowledge that just as like computer programmers and hardware engineers use intelligence to guide their experimentation, the DNA must use a similar kind of intelligence to guide its mutation and evolution.
Hey, yeah, to use a more common example that more people will understand is Thomas Edison learned a lot of different ways not to make a light bulb until finally found one way that worked.
That's a perfect example, Chandler. Exactly. So in other words, like, so yes, the mutations. There are many mutations, and what works is carried on. And what isn't what doesn't work isn't. But even like explaining that. So like first you have to ascribe intelligence to the process that that will determine, oh, this is working. Somehow, like, I mean, it could be like in terms of like, for example, like the organism receives more food, or the organism is like in the case of the moths, better camouflage to protect their safety from predators. But there's got to be some kind of like an intelligent evaluation of the outcome of these mutations that determines, oh, this is working, this is a correct solution.
Ah, so what we're saying here is there is a will, there is a desire of something that an organism wants to achieve, and then the consciousness, the sensory input tells it how much what's happening satisfies that desire or not. And so where there's a will, there's a way.
Chandler, excellent. Yes. So in other words, like there is a guiding, there are guiding desires. Just have as we human beings have like these guiding motivations, drives, um, the drive to survive, to seek pleasure and avoid pain. That these molecules, these cells, these DNA, molecules have that must have that same kind of will-driven motivation.
This is very interesting because this is something that you can observe when watching flies. And they're tiny and they're annoying, but they want your food. They smell your food and they come crawling all over your food trying to eat your food. And I've seen this. I've seen that I'm eating something and there's crumbs too small for me to eat from it anymore. But then a fly comes and I just let it have it. Like, hey, it wants to eat it. And I'm like, I'm gonna let it have its short happiness. They only live for 2 days anyway. So I'm gonna let it have its happiness and eat my food, you know. But
Absolutely.
obviously they have a desire to for that food. They smell it, and if you try to swat them, it doesn't work anyway because well, they see you. They're conscious. They are so conscious, and they have such eyes that when that's part George. That's part of why I see the consciousness of fly, ant, and a bee, and then people say that these babies aren't conscious at 9 months into the pregnancy or after they're born. They're still not conscious, and I'm like, what have you been smoking?
No, you're completely right. All right, Chandler, we've just got about 3 minutes left, so let's encapsulate what we've been saying now. Essentially, we human beings don't have a free will, yet we do many, many actions. We have many thoughts that we can characterize as purposeful, intelligent, actions and thoughts. And because we don't have free will, we can't ascribe this intelligence to ourselves. So we have to ascribe it to something outside of ourselves. And I think what we've been exploring is the fact that, like, that at the very small level of DNA, and I think maybe, of chromosomes and genes and all, we can find this kind of same guiding, purpose driven behavior that we must, I think we're compelled to define that behavior also as intelligent.
Yes, I think we have to. I think we really have to look at living organisms, the big and the small, and conclude that there's a will, a desire, an intelligence among each of them. And size is really an illusion too, because we're all made up of tinier particles anyway. We're all made up of tiny cells, and so you can't look at an ant or a bee or a fly and say that it's not conscious just because it's smaller. And you can't say that an elephant is more conscious just because it's bigger. So yes, a will and consciousness, it seems to be characteristics of life, living organisms.
Yeah, and I think we might even go further. For example, like the evolutionary changes that DNA molecules are capable of achieving, whether they achieve them over millions of years or over decades, like with the moths, are far more complex than we human beings can do, with our brains. So yes, we'd have to have, describe these processes at least, at the very least, as intelligent as our human intelligence. All right, Chandler, we've got about 40 seconds left. So like this is something that we have to revisit again and again, because basically, like, once we understand that free will is an illusion, the next very essential question, the next exploration is like, fine, if nothing is really up to us as human beings, who or what is it up to? And as you were saying before, this has religious implications. This has scientific implications. This has, like, it's basically an understanding of who we really are, most fundamentally.
And that's what it's about. We're trying to find out who we are, why we do what we do.
Okay. Okay. Chandler, thanks. This has been a great episode. We'll be back again with free will, science, and religion. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next time. Okay.